So throughout this process, I felt really well supported, both when I was off work in hospital, but also when I came back as well. And part of that was the regular sort of social check-in calls that you guys put in. And also you kindly came to visit me as well in hospital and in rehab. And I guess what I want to say is that made a big difference. Was that a sort of deliberate strategy that you decided on, or was it just something that kind of happened? Because it did make a really big difference to me to know that, that I was still seen as part of the team and you were eagerly waiting me to coming back. So it was great.
Yeah. So, I mean, I wouldn't put it as strongly as it being a strategy. Strategy is probably a little bit too defined a word to use, but
Yeah.
we felt it was really important, both for you and the team, actually, to get some sort of continuity of contact going. The difficulty there was in getting the balance right, because we didn't want in any way to be obtrusive, to put you in a place where you were starting to think about reintegrating into work before you were ready to do that, because obviously you had to focus your energies on getting better, and it was at a time when you were going through quite a steep therapy a process, weren't you, with physio and whatever?
Yeah, super intensive.
Yeah, so getting
I was
that
an inpatient at a couple of facilities, and going through intensive physio and cognitive therapy. So yes, that was pretty much the most intensive thing that's happened to me my whole life, actually.
Yeah.
The only thing that's remotely comparable is that moment when they hand you your child and say you can take this child home even though you aren't qualified in any way, or you don't feel that you know what to do. And that's
Matt,
kind of in at the deep end moment, isn't it?
I would say it was I mean, you know the team anyway.
Yeah.
And you know who we are, what we stand for. And I'm not just saying this for the sake of it, but I think it's actually just quite a natural sort of a natural response in a way for us.
Yeah.
And I think, if I'm honest, I think I've worked for lots of organizations where at a group level, maybe not at a corporate level, but certainly at a group level, I think the response is, is the same. Not all the time, but I think a lot of organizations would do similar things for similar situations.
I think yes, I think that's right. But there is something, isn't there, about letting the team know it's okay. Look, if you want to take time out of a business day to go to travel and to spend a little bit of time with Matt, as you were in hospital at that stage, then from a corporate point of view, we are supportive of that. That to set that tone, I think, was important.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. And it was particularly, I remember that time when it hadn't happened that long, when Dan came to see me when I was in Stevenage Hospital, and at that point, the whole enormity of what had happened was kind of hitting me at that point, and it made a big difference to see a friendly face from work. So that's cool. Good. So the main thing I want to get out of this session is sort of to help other employers, really, who might be going through this difficult process. So what aspects did you find most difficult in terms of bringing me back and reintegrating me in?
Nick, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably worth just going back to when we found out, because I think if we are looking at providing some advice for others, firstly, obviously, it was a really big shock. I remember it very clearly. Simon and I, we had our sort of CRMG dinner. We got a phone call that came through that explained your situation, and quite frankly, I don't think Simon and I were really that fussed about hosting the dinner. It was really quite a shock.
Yeah.
I think one point I would say is that a brain injury like you've had, Matt, I think you get, from my observation, there were some incredible positive development for yourself, and then it kind of plateau, and then it's not a linear improvement. And quite often myself, Simon, the rest of the team would reflect on when you've attended a meeting. We'd say, wow, isn't Matt doing some, making some great progress and things like that. And then sometimes, might even have a dip.
Yeah.
So that was one point. I think the other point as well, which is something that I personally felt, and I remember sort of seeking advice from people who I knew had much more experience with this, was when you went through a very dark period, and that I think is quite tricky. Simon's probably much better at this because of the work he does with Samaritans. I think for people that have not had not had that experience with people who've suffered from depression, that's really quite tough, because the idea of the stiff upper lip, saying, I don't know, it doesn't really work very well. So that definitely is when you need some
being British isn't helpful there, is it?
No, absolutely not. No,
I think that's a really good point, because, and I think there's a general issue here in that I think for a small business like CRMG, we were a lot better able to flex how we responded and interacted with you than maybe a larger organization would be able to. And if I'm thinking, if I were in a larger organization, how would I handle this? And if I were in a management position, I think I'd be wanting to make sure that there was someone designated in the business that, well, in a sense, owned that relationship, owned that line of communication with you, and that person was equipped not just to have discussions around work focus and handling fatigue and those things, but also be prepared for those to become fairly intense conversations from time to time. For my mind, a couple of the big challenges, I think firstly was just, and I think it's that point that Nick made, it's not a linear journey. So it's that constant uncertainty. You can't plan. And so when, from a business perspective, it was very difficult to have exhausting conversations that involved your involvement, because we couldn't be sure that you'd be able to put the degree of input that we would need on a particular client engagement, for example, at the right time. So that was a big challenge. And I think the other challenge for me, I think it's the point we were just making, it's where does that line sit between being a good, ethically focused, nurturing organization that's very much geared towards giving people a positive experience, versus going into full-on personal counselling mode, because there is a line that you have to maintain there, because ultimately you're still a business. You've got to make decisions in the best interests of the business, and because we're a small business, inevitably that line became very blurred a lot of the time. That was a challenge.
I mean, I would reflect and say you did a remarkably good job of that. I mean, I could tell while it was happening, and I could tell in those moments, when it was difficult. But I never felt under pressure to do more work than I was ready to do at that particular point. And it's worth saying to the people watching this that I had a very kind of graduated, progressive introduction back into work, which was really good. So I had regular one-to-ones with Simon to look at how many hours I was able to do and how productive I was in those hours. And each time we did that, I think pretty much, every 3 or 4 weeks, well, we were meeting weekly, but every 3 or 4 weeks, Simon and Nick were having discussions about, whether it was time to look at my pay again, because obviously I was on reduced pay when I came back because I was doing less hours. And it felt very, obviously it was a bit dynamic, but it felt very positive to think, not so much the financial aspect, but the fact that my performance was being looked at that actually felt very positive for me in that it didn't feel judgmental. It was like, okay, how's Matt doing, and is he, because I know for you guys it was just as much focused on, is Matt pushing too hard in terms of the work hours that he's doing. I know you were very concerned about that as well, so that harmed my recovery and that kind of thing.
I think there's a general point. Sorry, go on, Nick.
No, I think that's a really good point, Matt, you've raised. We were very conscious about, God, I mean, the last thing we wanted was, pushing you to a point where, another event happened. I think just on that point, one thing that's probably worth highlighting is that it's just an observation from my side is, sort of morning time seems to be the time when seems to be the time when you have your most energy, and then towards the end of the day. And I think, as obvious, I mean, that's the same with anyone, right? But I think it's more pronounced for somebody who had a brain injury like yourself. And that's maybe just a hint for any employer to consider that, maybe you start off doing half days or, finish earlier, whatever it may be. So I think that's quite a natural feature of how your recovery works.
I mean, I'm much better at managing fatigue now, and my fatigue is much better because I'm so much more physically active. That's what's helped me there. And I do a lot of walking, and I've got my treadmill. Sometimes these guys will tell you that I actually do meetings on my treadmill as well. Although I haven't done one of those for a while, have I? Should do one of those again. I slightly hurt my ankle at the weekend, so I didn't want to do today's from that. So next week I'll commit to doing a treadmill meeting with you. Okay, cool.
I think Matt, just one more point about those conversations that we would have fairly regularly. I think there's something in here about the need for transparency, honesty, because some of those conversations could have the potential to get tricky. Particularly when you're having a conversation about the degree to which someone's contributing to the business and sort of weighing that up, against, our duty to do the right thing by you. I mean, clearly there's a baseline of legal duties that any organisation has to meet when you're working with someone that will fall under the Equalities Act, for example. But most organisations would want to go way beyond their core minimum legal obligations, and us being transparent about that, I think, was really important, because I think there's a risk that you don't want to be that open and honest for fear of creating difficult conversations that potentially put someone in your situation back a little bit. But I think the fact that we were open and honest, and that was a two-way thing, was really important.
Definitely, yeah. And I always felt that I could talk about how I felt in terms of my work contribution, and if I was suffering badly with fatigue at a given point, I could talk to you about that, and that was always there for me. So yeah, okay. Yes, did you ever discuss with the team about sort of adjusting how what they needed to do to adapt to the new me?
Yes. Yes. Do you want to go first, or shall I?
Yeah, I think one of them is, I know you keep saying the new me, but like in many ways, Matt, the old you is back.
Yeah, I call myself Matt 2.0 now.
Fine. An upgrade.
So I'm different, but not new. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. So one of the things I remember very early on was you had a habit of speaking over people.
Yeah.
And I think that was intentional. That's just one of the features of recovery from a brain injury. So I I remember speaking to a couple of the team and saying, look, expect this. And I think in some cases we may have even said to, a couple of clients that what you'd gone through, they were very open, fine with it. And then, after a couple of months, it kind of all settled down. And I think, you were relearning that sort of that situation.
Yeah. It's also partly about the fact that because of my memory issues, at the time I was worried about forgetting it by the time the natural conversational point came about, and I still struggle with that to an extent. Now I just note things down next to me in my book if it's an important thing I've got to remember, because even 30 seconds, 60 seconds later, it can be difficult.
Yeah. I mean, what Nick, with the example Nick raised, I think is a good one, because if you weren't sort of aware of what had been going on, you'd have been a little bit taken aback at times, because there were instances. There are a couple of types of interaction. Sometimes we would be discussing something, and then suddenly you would blurt something out which was not necessarily related, and it was very clear that it was something that had suddenly become front of mind for you, and you felt the need to express it, and you did. And that's, as Nick says, that essentially we just had to roll with it and let people know, look, that's going to happen from time to time. We just roll with it. And letting clients know that might happen again, and no problem whatsoever in terms of reactions from clients.
All the clients that I interacted with have been so supportive.
Absolutely.
And
then the second thing that would tend to happen was that the Matt 2.0, I think, is way more in tune with himself, in that you're far happier and far more comfortable talking about how you feel and doing that in a business meeting. And then sometimes we'd end up having a conversation about a substantive business topic, and then the meeting would very quickly become a conversation about how you were doing, how you were feeling, and it felt more like a sort of a group therapy sort of dynamic. And again, we just with the team, we were just look, that's how these conversations are going to be, and that's absolutely fine, because that's what that needs right now. So I think rolling with it, letting clients know, or anyone know that's going to be interacting with you, that you might not behave necessarily in a typical way. That should all be just business as usual, I think.
Okay, cool. So is there anything we haven't discussed that you think is an important thing for employers to think about? We've covered a lot of topics there, so maybe that.
So for me, I think Nick's already mentioned it when he talked about the nature of your recovery not being linear. I think we were really buoyed up in the early days when we saw that you were making such rapid progress. And we got to a point a few months in where you hit a bit of an emotional bump. And looking back,
it was all around the cranioplasty time, wasn't it? When I was trying to prepare for a huge operation, and it kept getting put off, and that was the one that really triggered some depression in me, because I thought we were never going to get it done, and it feels like it.
And that was difficult because, and I'm being completely honest now, in the spirit of the discussion we were having earlier, that rubbed off on other team members, so everyone was taking a negative hit at that time. And I think the thing the thing that I think, if we were revisiting that period, that we would want to make sure is that you were getting in addition to a sensible reintegration to work, that you were also getting some form of emotional counselling or therapy, whether that takes the form of something structured provided by medical services, or whether it's something that you just do off your own bat, or something that we would have been prepared to support in terms of funding. I think that having recourse to that type of support, as well as the more structural, functional support that as a business we would provide in retrospect. Earlier, I mean, that would have probably been helpful. But Matt, I think you're probably best positioned to comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the other thing happens around that point. I think that was around sort of November, starting December, that's when your NHS therapy starts to disappear.
Yeah.
You know, at that point we were like 9 months after the incident. So yeah, that after you've been essentially having very regular, almost constant therapy for a period as long as that, and somebody says it's going to end, that in itself is frightening, because you think, well, will I be able to cope without that weekly or bi-weekly support, whatever? So yeah, so that definitely would have made a difference to me in terms of in fact, I did reach out to Headway, the charity, and got some counselling at that point, because my NHS therapy had ended. And that is something I would thoroughly recommend to other ABI survivors, because Headway are a marvellous organisation and they were really, really helpful with that. So
yeah.
And I think another thing that just became apparent a little later on was when, unfortunately, you started having the odd seizure.
Yeah.
We were in a situation where you were due to turn up at a meeting and you didn't, which wasn't in character, I should point out for our viewers or listeners. And if we'd have had a clearer protocol as to what time period we would leave it before we did anything about not seeing Matt when we would expect to, an agreement with those around Matt in a domestic setting as to how we would handle calls to emergency services, and so on. That, you know, just it's a mechanistic thing. And in the event, we were absolutely fine because we acted fast. And actually, the outcome was that I think both we and your wife had both called emergency services at the same time. But fundamentally, the important thing is that they turned up. But just having some clear guidelines around what should happen in those sorts of circumstances for the future.
And thankfully, my wife was home, so they didn't have to bash the door down with the big red door knocker.
That's a good point that you raised there, Si, because we're constantly putting all these processes in place for organizations on how to manage their incidents, cyber incidents. We probably need to get sort of, first point of calls for the rest of the team, because you never know if it's going to happen. Matt, just to that last point there about anything, to do, maybe not differently, but anything sort of others can think about. I don't know if there's anything differently, but one of the things I would highlight, and this was just a very personal thing for me, was how overwhelmed I felt when I saw you when you were in your rehab, because I didn't know what to expect, and it is quite a shock for people, when they've seen a colleague who, like yourself, keen mountain biker and whatnot. It's very difficult to actually prepare yourself for it. And I say that's important for maybe anyone listening, because it probably wouldn't be very helpful if you had somebody that reacted very sort of emotionally, if you like. I don't think that would help you.
Shocked by it,
so yeah, that's, I don't know, that was just something that struck me. I remember seeing you and thinking, wow. Although Simon had sort of talked about broadly what to expect, it is something that you can't always prepare yourself for. I
mean, it's true. Like nobody who suffers this injury is prepared to deal with it, and neither are any of the people around them.
Yeah.
So it's a very good point. That you can't expect this kind of thing, and you won't know how it's going to affect you and how you're going to react to it. It's an extreme situation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But you're coming out the other side of it.
Yeah, we're getting there.
Well, the fact that we're having this conversation and the fact that you're actually pressing ahead with the personal drive to do these recordings, to publish the material that you are, is amazing. It's fantastic.
Yeah. Well, I think it's really important. Having come to the other side of this, now I want to help as many people as I can, because it's, most people around me seem to think I've made a reasonable job of it, and particularly around employment. I mean, it's been so, I can't understate to you guys how important it's been, that the fact that I've been able to get back to work, not just because it helps secure the future of my family and reduces my anxiety in that respect, but also cognitively, it's really helped me.
Yeah.
So like being involved in those team meetings and solving difficult problems and typing with my slightly gammy left hand is in itself a therapy task, so it's not like I've had to put down therapy activities. It's been valuable to me as well in that way, in terms of helping my recovery. And that's why I think as many people that we can get back into employment who've had this kind of injury is an enormous win, not just for them, but also for the country. If people can be contributing and working and paying their taxes as well, because what I've had, all the support I've had, is expensive, and I appreciate that. And there'll never be enough money in the NHS pot to do everything that we'd like to do around this, but it would be cool if we were able to reduce the postcode lottery associated with this stuff.
Yeah,
that's what I really want to do. And I really hope this national strategy for acquired brain injury does get implemented at some point. It's about 3 or 4 years overdue at the moment, but it'd be nice to see it in the future.
Indeed.
Okay. Thank you, gentlemen. I think we'll probably finish it there, because otherwise it will come. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Matt.
No worries.
That was a good chat.
It was good.